The Galactic Council Chamber hummed, not with the quiet murmur of polite discourse, but with the low, resonant thrum of barely contained galactic aggression. Imagine a parliament building designed by a committee of war-obsessed crustaceans, and you're halfway there. Towering figures, some with shimmering exoskeletons, others trailing iridescent slime, filled the tiered seats. Each representative bore the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds, and the combined stink of their collective ambition could curdle milk at 50 paces. At the apex of this august, and frankly terrifying assembly, sat the Grand Poobah Zorgon 12, a being whose very presence radiated an aura of, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to meet him down a dark alley, or indeed, anywhere at all. Zorgon 12 cleared his throat, a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. The agenda for this cycle is clear, he boomed, his voice amplified by technology that made it sound like the universe itself was constipated. Total galactic domination. Are there any objections? A chorus of guttural roars, metallic. Clicks and unsettling squelches signified unanimous agreement. The galaxy, it seemed, was in very, very serious trouble. And then there was Betty. Seated rather precariously in a hastily conjured folding chair, at the very front of the chamber, sat Grandma Betty from Doncaster, all 5'2" of her, wearing a floral-patterned dress, sensible orthopedic shoes, and clutching a handbag that had probably seen more action than most of the assembled dignitaries combined. She blinked owlishly, adjusting her bifocals and, looking for all the world like she'd accidentally wandered into the wrong bingo hall. The silence that followed Zorgon 12's declaration was broken only by the gentle rustling of Betty's plastic shopping bag, which contained, among other things, a half-eaten packet of digestives and a rather judgmental-looking chihuahua named Princess. The assembled aliens stared, and when I say stared, I mean truly deeply existentially stared. They had conquered entire star systems, annihilated civilizations with a flick of a tentacle, and brokered peace treaties that made Machiavelli look like a preschooler, but this was beyond them. A human, a grandma no less, had somehow infiltrated the most secure location in the galaxy. Zorgon 12, for the first time in centuries, was speechless. His multifaceted eyes swiveled, searching for answers in the blank faces of his advisors. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a small, tentacled creature squeaked, Supreme Overlord, should we vaporize it? Zorgon 12 considered this, his brow ridges furrowed in thought. Vaporizing things was, after all, his go-to solution for most problems. But something felt off. This human, this Betty, radiated an aura not of power, but of utter confusion. It was unnerving. Betty, meanwhile, rummaged in her handbag, pulled out a digestive biscuit, and offered it to Princess. "Want a bite, love?" she cooed, oblivious to the galactic drama unfolding around her. The chihuahua, unimpressed, merely sniffed and turned its nose up. The fate of the galaxy, it seemed, rested on the shoulders, or rather, in the handbag, of a very ordinary, very confused, and very biscuit-wielding grandma. Betty cleared her throat, a sound barely audible above the council's nervous drone. She leaned towards the ornate translation device, a bizarre contraption that resembled a cross between a squid and a badly wired toaster. "Excuse me, dear," she said, her Doncaster accent thick as Yorkshire pudding, "but could someone possibly put the kettle on? I'm gasping for a cuppa." The translation device whirred, sputtered, and then emitted a series of strangled squawks. What the assembled dignitaries heard was, "I hereby initiate planetary annexation through thermal assault. My thirst demands galactic surrender." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Thermal assault? Galactic surrender. This unassuming human was making demands that made Zorgon 12's most ambitious power grabs look like a polite request for directions. The tentacled creature who had suggested vaporization earlier now fainted, its tentacles twitching spasmodically. Zorgon 12, his multifaceted eyes narrowed, leaned forward. "Human," he boomed, the translation device miraculously managing to convey the menace in his tone. "Explain yourself. What is this thermal assault you speak of?" Betty, utterly oblivious to the rising panic, blinked at the device. "Thermal assault? Love, I just want a brew. You know tea, biscuits? A nice sit-down? The translation device, clearly overwhelmed by the sheer ordinariness of her request, translated this as, I unleash a wave of unimaginable comfort, rendering your armies docile and your leaders compliant. Prepare for utter tranquility. The council members exchanged horrified glances. Tranquility? Compliance? These were concepts as alien to them as a grandma in a floral dress. They were warriors, conquerors, beings of pure, unadulterated aggression. The idea of being rendered docile by a wave of comfort was simply beyond comprehension. Little did they know, Betty's idea of comfort involved a lukewarm beverage and a stale biscuit, but the damage was already done. Now for the Xylarxians of planet Floopy-Doo, tea was no ordinary beverage. Oh no. For them, the ritual of tea preparation was steeped in centuries of tradition, a complex dance of aggression and dominance. The brewing vessel, known as the aggro pot, was forged in the heart of dying stars and infused with the psychic energy of 1,000 generations of warrior baristas. The tea leaves themselves, harvested from the volcanic slopes of Mount Doom-Malicious, were said to contain the concentrated rage of 1,000 suns. To request tea from a Xylarxian was to challenge them to a duel of honor, a battle of wills, a tea party with potentially devastating consequences. Betty, of course, was completely unaware of all this. To her, making tea involved boiling water, chucking in a tea bag, and adding a splash of milk. But to the Galactic Council, her simple request was an act of war, a declaration of intent that threatened to shatter the delicate balance of galactic power. The Council's unease only deepened as the meeting progressed. Betty, bless her cotton socks, had pulled out a small bag from her seemingly bottomless handbag. The bag, made of what appeared to be brightly colored yarn, intrigued them. Was this some sort of containment unit for a miniature black hole? A portable cloaking device? Then, she produced 2 long, pointed objects made of polished wood. The Xylarxians, known for their obsession with sharp, pointy things, were immediately on high alert. Were these some kind of projectiles? Needles of immense power, capable of piercing even the strongest energy shields? Zorgon 12, who had regained consciousness but was now clutching his tentacles in a state of profound anxiety, croaked, What? What are those, human? What are you planning to do with those implements of pointy doom? Betty looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. These are just my knitting needles. I find it helps me relax, you know. All this hubbub is making my blood pressure go through the roof. Relax? Knitting? These words, translated through the increasingly erratic device, became, These are focusing conduits for my psychic annihilation beam. I shall unravel your realities thread by thread until only comforting darkness remains. The council members exchanged glances of sheer terror. Psychic annihilation? Unraveling realities? This was far worse than they could have imagined. This wasn't just a threat to their physical existence. It was a threat to their very sanity. The rhythmic clicking sound that emanated from the needles, as Betty began to manipulate them, only amplified their fear. Click, click, click. Each click echoed through the chamber, resonating with the deepest, darkest corners of their collective consciousness. To the council, these weren't the gentle sounds of a grandmother's hobby. They were the ticking clock of galactic destruction. They watched, mesmerized and horrified, as Betty's nimble fingers worked with the yarn. The rhythmic clicking became a hypnotic drone, each repetition seemingly weaving a tighter web of doom around them. The air crackled with anticipation and dread. What unholy creation was she conjuring? One of the smaller insectoid delegates buzzed nervously, its wings vibrating at an alarming rate. The clicking, it's disrupting my neural pathways. I can feel my mind unraveling. Another, a bulbous, gelatinous being, began to tremble uncontrollably. She's weaving a tapestry of terror. I can see it. Visions of galactic collapse, the end of all things. Even Zorgon 12, hardened veteran of countless interstellar wars, felt a cold sweat trickling down his tentacles. He had faced down planet-destroying superweapons, navigated treacherous asteroid fields, and stared into the abyss of black holes. But nothing had prepared him for the sheer, unadulterated horror of a human grandmother with knitting needles. The Galactic Council, humbled and strangely soothed, immediately convened an emergency session. This time, however, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The rigid formality had melted away, replaced by a pervasive sense of calm. Krill Lord Zorp even brought a tray of chamomile tea, though it was served in repurposed plasma cannons. It was unanimously decided. The military was to be disbanded. All weapons were to be decommissioned. War, it seemed, was simply too uncomfortable. A new era of galactic peace was declared. An era built not on fear and conquest, but on fluffy blankets and warm beverages. Grandma Betty, the unlikely architect of this radical shift in galactic policy, was hailed as a hero. Medals were offered, parades were planned, and several planets even renamed themselves in her honor. Planet Betty was particularly popular. But Betty, ever the pragmatist, politely declined. "Oh, that's very kind, dears," she said, "but I've got my soaps to catch up on, and Mr. Whiskers needs his dinner." So after a heartfelt farewell ceremony involving a lot of awkwardly cuddly aliens, she boarded a small, unassuming shuttle back to Earth. She left behind a galaxy utterly transformed. A galaxy where conflict resolution was achieved not through superior firepower, but through the strategic deployment of hand-knitted goods. A galaxy where the most feared weapon was a well-placed hug. Back on Earth, Betty settled back into her quiet life. The neighbors were none the wiser about her intergalactic adventure. The only evidence was a slightly larger yarn stash and a newfound fondness for chamomile tea. As she sat in her favorite armchair, Mr. Whiskers purring contentedly in her lap, Betty smiled. "Comfort," she mused. "It's a powerful thing, isn't it?" And the galaxy, now swathed in a warm, knitted embrace, couldn't agree more. Years passed, decades even. The galaxy, once poised for endless conflict, underwent a profound and frankly bizarre transformation. The cozy revolution, as it became known, spread like wildfire, planet by planet, species by species. Former battle cruisers were refitted as mobile knitting workshops. Soldiers traded in their plasma rifles for crochet hooks, and the war cries of 1,000 worlds were replaced by the gentle clicking of needles. The Krill Lords, once feared for their ruthlessness, now hosted intergalactic tea parties complete with doilies and finger sandwiches. The reptilian Grolak, notorious for their venomous attacks, became renowned for their intricate embroidery. Even the cybernetic Zorganites, previously obsessed with assimilation, developed a passion for pattern design. On every corner of the galaxy you could see aliens happily knitting. Giant space worms adorned in colorful scarves, tiny energy beings in miniature hats, and rock monsters sporting the most elaborate sweaters you could imagine. The change wasn't just aesthetic, it was fundamental. Crime rates plummeted, political tensions eased, productivity, surprisingly, soared. Turns out a galaxy full of contented, creatively engaged citizens is a surprisingly efficient one. Historians would later debate the cause of this unprecedented shift. Some credited Betty's inherent goodness, others the inherent power of comfort, and a few even theorized some kind of subliminal messaging embedded in the yarn itself. Whatever the reason, one thing was certain: the galaxy was a far cozier place, and somewhere, on a small blue planet, a kindly old woman smiled, completely oblivious to the galactic empire she had inadvertently knitted into existence. And Mr. Whiskers, well, he finally got that custom-made cat condo he'd always dreamed of. It was shaped like a spaceship, of course, and entirely covered in the fluffiest yarn the galaxy had to offer. The council members strained their senses, desperately trying to decipher the true nature of Betty's weapon. They deployed their most advanced scanning technology, analyzing the yarn, the needles, and the rhythmic clicking with feverish intensity. The initial scans came back inconclusive. The yarn was composed of, well, yarn. Ordinary, run-of-the-mill, earthly yarn. The needles were made of wood. Wood. But the readings were fluctuating wildly, suggesting that the objects were far more complex than they appeared. One particularly ambitious scientist theorized that the yarn was woven with microscopic nanobots, capable of dismantling matter at a subatomic level. The needles, he claimed, were focusing devices, channeling the energy of the nanobots into a concentrated beam of knitting power. Another proposed that the clicking sound was a form of sonic warfare, a frequency specifically designed to shatter the crystalline structures of their brains. He even produced a complex equation to support his theory, which naturally no one understood. The tension in the chamber was now palpable, thick enough to choke on. The council members were paralyzed by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, unable to look away from the seemingly innocuous yet undeniably terrifying figure of Grandma Betty and her clicking needles. Betty, completely unaware that she was the most terrifying being in the galaxy at that moment, smiled warmly. Now, where were we? Oh yes, this lovely helmet. She gestured toward the gleaming, ornate headgear of the Glarbonian delegate, a creature whose face resembled a particularly grumpy mudskipper. I think it could use a little warming up. The Glarbonian delegate, whose name was, for the sake of galactic record-keeping, Glorpak 7, shuddered. Warming up? Was this some sort of thermal weaponization? Was she planning to superheat his helmet until his brains boiled? He tried to subtly signal the security drones, but they were all too busy staring at the clicking needles with abject horror to notice. Betty, oblivious, approached Glorpak 7 with a disarming smile. Hold still, dearie. This won't take a minute. She held the helmet in her hands, examining it with the critical eye of a seasoned crafter. Yes. A bit drafty around the ears, isn't it? Drafty around the ears? Glorpak 7's internal monologue spiraled into existential dread. The draft wasn't a design flaw. It was a carefully calibrated ventilation system to prevent overheating during intense strategic calculations. Was she mocking his superior intellect with her casual observation? Was this psychological warfare designed to destabilize his command structure? And then, she began. With practiced ease, Betty slipped the knitting needles into the yarn and began to knit. Click, click, click. The rhythmic sound filled the chamber, each click a hammer blow against the council's collective sanity. Glorpak 7 felt a bead of cold slime trickle down his brow. As the yarn flowed between the needles, a colorful, amorphous shape began to take form. The council members watched with a mixture of fascination and dread, their minds conjuring up images of interdimensional portals, reality-bending singularities, and weapons of unimaginable destruction. One delegate, a silicon-based life form, began to emit a high-pitched whine. It's weaving a pattern of unspeakable complexity. I can't comprehend it. Another, a gaseous being, began to swirl uncontrollably. The colors. They're disrupting my atmospheric equilibrium. I'm losing cohesion. Glorpak 7 himself felt a strange tingling sensation spreading across his carapace. Was this the beginning of the end? Was he about to be transformed into some sort of knitted monstrosity? He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable agony. Betty, meanwhile, was humming a cheerful tune, her brow furrowed in concentration. Just a few more rows, she muttered to herself. And then a little bit of ribbing around the edges. Can't have a cozy that doesn't fit properly, can we? Ribbing? Cozy? The translation device sputtered and whirred, attempting to make sense of these bizarre concepts. The resulting translation, projected in shimmering holographic letters above, Betty's head read, applying structural reinforcement to the dimensional tear, preparing for ultimate assimilation. The council gasped. Assimilation? They were doomed. They had underestimated the human grandmother. They had dismissed her as a harmless old woman. Now they were about to pay the ultimate price. Glorpak 7, summoning the last vestiges of his courage, opened his eyes and stared directly at Betty. Human, he croaked, his voice trembling. What is your ultimate goal? What do you hope to achieve with this knitted abomination? Betty looked up, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Why, dear, I'm just making a cozy. Don't want you catching a chill now, do we? The Galactic Council, teetering on the precipice of utter panic, initiated Protocol Omega-0. This was reserved for galaxy-ending threats, rogue black holes, and apparently elderly women wielding pointy sticks. Sirens blared, casting the assembly hall in a disorienting strobe of red and yellow. Glarbonian shock troops, clad in bioluminescent armor that amplified their already intimidating bulk, stomped into the chamber, weapons charged. These weren't your average rent-a-cops. They were elite soldiers genetically engineered for maximum aggression and minimal, well, anything else. Really, their leader, a hulking brute named Grugnax-12, bellowed a challenge that echoed through the hall. Halt, knitter of doom. Lay down your yarn-based weaponry. You are surrounded. The translation device struggled, mangling his declaration into a series of garbled squeaks and pops, but the intent was clear: surrender or face annihilation. Outside, the Council's flagship, the Indomitable, shifted its orbital position, its main cannons locking onto the assembly hall. The ship's captain, a crustacean-like being named Krill Lord Zorp, watched the proceedings on a holographic screen, his mandibles clicking nervously. Ready torpedoes, he rasped to his crew. Target the fluffy anomaly. Maximum firepower. Deep within the Indomitable's vast armory, technicians scrambled to load the most devastating weapons in the galactic arsenal. Neutron bombs, antimatter, warheads, and reality distortion missiles were all considered, then deemed inappropriate. Too messy, one technician muttered. We don't want to damage the knitted artifact. They finally settled on a containment field generator, device capable of trapping entire planets in stasis. Back in the assembly hall, chaos reigned. Delegates dove under tables, shielding themselves with ceremonial cushions and diplomatic briefcases. The air crackled with nervous energy, the scent of ozone mixing with the faint aroma of lavender emanating from Betty's handbag. The moment arrived. Betty, utterly unfazed by the Glarbonian shock troops and the ominous hum of charged weaponry, beamed at the council. Ta-da, she chirped, holding up her handiwork. A helmet cozy, keeps your head nice and warm. She carefully approached the flustered council member whose helmet she had measured, the perpetually perspiring Xylar, representative of the gelatinous Bloopian collective. Xylar, frozen in terror, could only gurgle softly as Betty gently placed the knitted cozy over his headgear. The effect was instantaneous and utterly unexpected. Xylar's gelatinous form began to quiver, not with fear, but with contentment. A blissful smile spread across his usually anxious face. His tentacles relaxed, and he let out a sigh that sounded suspiciously like a purr. Then something even stranger occurred. The Glarbonian shock troops, those genetically engineered engines of destruction, began to wobble. Their bioluminescent armor dimmed, their weapons clattered to the floor, and they sank into a heap of confused, cuddly-ness. Even Krill Lord Zorp on the Indomitable, usually a paragon of military stoicism, felt a strange sensation wash over him, a powerful urge to relax. He canceled the attack order, much to the bewilderment of his crew. Belay that, he mumbled, his mandibles slowing their frantic clicking. Prepare chamomile tea. It turned out that the galaxy's most formidable species possessed a peculiar vulnerability, a weakness so profound, so unexpected, that it had remained hidden for millennia. They were utterly defenseless against comfort. Millennia spent honing their battle skills, building interstellar empires, and developing planet-destroying weaponry, and all it took to bring them to their knees was a bit of knitted wool. The warmth and softness of the cozy, the simple, unassuming act of providing comfort, short-circuited their aggressive programming, flooded their systems with a wave of, well, it could only be described as pure, unadulterated bliss. The Galactic Council, the terror of countless worlds, was helpless, incapacitated by coziness.